Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to watch our next video. Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to watch our next video.
Thanks for watching. Follow a brighter destiny for more powerful stories, and don't forget to subscribe.
Excuse me. I believe you skipped my row. Sterling Airways Laws Flight 884, cruising at 34,000 feet somewhere over Nebraska, and Patricia Vance had just finished pouring vintage champagne for 6 passengers in first class, every single one of them except the only black man sitting in the cabin. She set the bottle down on the service cart with a sharp clink, the kind of sound that isn't an accident. Champagne is reserved for passengers who actually belong up here, she said, not for people who talk their way into seats they can't afford. He had his boarding pass ready before she even finished the sentence. So does every con artist I've ever caught, she said, snatching it out of his hand like it was something she didn't want touching her skin. Stolen cards, fake confirmations, I've seen every trick there is. She threw the pass back into his lap and pulled a cloth napkin from her vest pocket, wiping down the armrest beside him as if he had left a stain on it just by existing. People like you always want what was never yours to begin with, she said. The cabin went dead quiet. A few passengers looked down at their laps, suddenly very interested in their own hands. The man in seat 2A said nothing. He turned his head toward the window and watched the clouds. And what he did in the next 90 seconds would end 3 careers before that plane ever touched the ground. If you've ever wanted to watch someone's arrogance collapse in real time, stay with me, because we are about to get there. But first, let me take you back 2 hours, to a quiet man in a gray hoodie who walked onto a plane that belonged to him, and nobody in that cabin had any idea. O'Hare International Airport, Chicago, 6:14 in the morning. The first-class check-in counter at Sterling Airways sat behind a velvet rope, marble under your feet, soft jazz piped through hidden speakers, the kind of atmosphere designed to make you forget you were still technically standing in an airport. Elijah Grant walked up to that counter wearing a plain gray hoodie, faded jeans, and a pair of work boots that had clearly logged some miles. No printed itinerary in his hand, no rolling suitcase, just a worn leather duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He didn't look anxious the way most people look when they're about to fly. He looked like a man walking into a room he had walked into 1,000 times before. He handed the woman behind the counter his passport and said a single word, his last name. She typed it in, and her posture changed instantly, the practiced calm of someone who had just realized who was standing in front of her. Of course, Mr. Grant, she said, seat 2A. Your usual arrangement. She didn't ask for a credit card. She didn't ask him to confirm anything. She already knew. Every employee at Sterling Airways had been briefed on exactly one name during onboarding. If Elijah Grant checks in for a flight, you treat him the way you'd treat the person who signs your paycheck, because that is precisely what he is. Elijah Grant, 36 years old, majority owner and chief executive of Sterling Airways, the youngest person to ever hold controlling interest in a major American carrier. A business magazine had profiled him once, 4 years earlier. He turned down the cover. He turned down the photographer. Since then, he had given exactly 0 interviews, kept no public social media accounts, and avoided every industry gala his publicist tried to drag him toward. His face existed in only 2 places on Earth: his company identification badge, and one framed photograph inside the Sterling Airways boardroom that most of the 12,000 people who worked for him had never once set foot inside. There was a reason the owner of an airline flew coach-adjacent looks in a thrift store hoodie instead of a $3,000 suit with 2 bodyguards trailing behind him. He wanted to see, he wanted to know, without any warning given, exactly how his crews treated the people who paid for their paychecks when nobody thought the boss was watching. This was flight number 16 of this particular experiment, spread out over the past 3 years. 14 of those flights had gone completely fine. One had a baggage handling issue that got fixed within the week. One had a gate agent whose attitude needed correcting, and it was gently with retraining rather than termination. Flight 884 was about to become the 17th data point, and it was about to be the one nobody at Sterling Airways would ever forget. He walked down the boarding tunnel that smelled faintly of cedar and citrus, a scent his design team had spent 11 months perfecting before the cabin refresh 18 months earlier. The first-class section held 8 wide leather seats in a soft charcoal gray, each one angled just slightly toward the window. A woman in a cream blazer sat in 1A, thumb scrolling through her phone without lifting her eyes. A silver-haired man in a navy three-piece suit occupied 3B, a folded copy of the Wall Street Journal resting on his armrest. A couple in matching camel-colored coats had already claimed row 4, murmuring about a dinner reservation somewhere in downtown Los Angeles. Elijah slid into 2A, clicked his seatbelt into place and set his phone face down on the armrest. Across the aisle in 2C, sat a man of about 70, white hair combed back with a precision that only comes from decades spent standing in front of juries. Gold-rimmed reading glasses rested low on his nose. A charcoal blazer hung open over a pale blue shirt, no tie, the uniform of a man who had spent 40 years winning arguments for a living and now spent his mornings on a porch with black coffee and a paperback thriller he could solve before Chapter 4. His name was Walter Sinclair, retired trial attorney, and when Elijah sat down across from him, Walter simply nodded once. Elijah nodded back. Neither man needed to say anything else. Then Patricia Vance appeared at the front of the cabin like she owned the airspace itself. Navy vest pressed to a razor edge, silk scarf knotted precisely at her throat, gold name badge polished so it caught the light from 3 different angles at once. 12 years, she liked to say, and she said it the way some people announced their salary, slowly, so you'd feel the full weight of it land. She greeted the woman in 1A by name. She complimented the silver-haired man's tie. She told the couple in camel coats their usual row was waiting for them exactly as requested. Then she reached row 2. She smiled at Walter first. "Mr. Sinclair, always a pleasure." Then her eyes landed on Elijah, and the smile didn't vanish exactly. It just changed shape, the warmth draining out of it the way color drains from the evening sky, slowly and then all at once. What remained was polite enough to survive a glance, but hollow enough to feel in your chest if you were paying attention. She gave him a short nod. No name, no welcome. She moved on toward the galley. Walter noticed. He turned a page in his paperback, but his eyes weren't tracking the words anymore. They were tracking her. 20 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign clicked off, and Patricia rolled the champagne cart out of the galley. 3 bottles of a French vintage 7 crystal glasses already lined up on the top shelf. Row 1 got a smile and a full pour. Row 3 got a laugh at something the silver-haired man said. Row 4 got a compliment about matching coats. Then she reached row 2, filled Walter's glass without a word, and pushed the cart straight past Elijah's seat. She didn't slow down. She didn't glance over. She moved past him the exact same way you'd walk past a piece of furniture you'd already decided didn't belong in the room. "Excuse me," Elijah said, raising one hand. "I believe you skipped my row." Patricia stopped the cart, not because she wanted to, but because his voice had carried far enough for the whole cabin to hear it. She turned slowly, the kind of slow that isn't patience, it's a performance, timed so that every passenger could see her face before she said a single word, so that whatever came next would look justified before it even started. She looked at him the way a store clerk looks at a teenager who just walked in wearing a backpack, already guilty, already a problem, already unworthy of the benefit of the doubt. "You didn't skip anything," she said. "Champagne service is for passengers who actually belong in this cabin. Not for people who scam their way into seats they'd never be able to afford honestly." A woman across the aisle stopped scrolling her phone. The silver-haired man lowered his newspaper an inch. The couple in camel coats exchanged a glance that clearly said, "We are staying out of this." Patricia wasn't finished. She leaned one hand against the seat back in front of Elijah, casual, territorial, the posture of someone leaning against a velvet rope they had personally installed. "You want to know what I think happened here?" she said, tilting her head. "I think somebody handed you a promo code, or maybe you found a glitch in the booking app, or maybe you sweet-talked some gate agent who didn't know any better. Because people like you don't fly first class. People like you don't sip champagne at 34,000 feet. That is not your world, and somewhere deep down, you already know that." Elijah's jaw tightened for exactly 1 second. That was the only sign anything had landed. Then his face relaxed, and he reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out his boarding pass, and held it up between 2 fingers. "Seat 2A, first class. I'd like my champagne, please, please," he said please after everything she had just thrown at him. Patricia didn't take the pass gently. She snatched it, the way you'd rip a flyer off your windshield, holding it out at arm's length as though it smelled. She didn't scan it. She didn't hold it to the light. She just stared at him and let 3 full seconds pass in silence, timed perfectly so every passenger in the cabin would be watching by the time she spoke again. "So does every thief," she said, and tossed the pass back into his lap. "Stolen cards, fake bookings. I have been doing this job for 12 years, sir." 12. I know exactly what an upgrade scam looks like when it's sitting right in front of me. She pulled a folded cloth napkin from her vest pocket and wiped down the armrest beside him, slow, deliberate, the way you'd clean a surface after something dirty had touched it. Elijah watched every stroke of that napkin without flinching, without looking away, the stillness of a man who was recording everything, just not on any device. "People like you," Patricia said, tucking the napkin back into her pocket, "always want what was never yours to begin with." The cabin wasn't quiet anymore, it was frozen, and there is a difference between the two. Quiet is simply the absence of noise. Frozen is the absence of courage. 7 passengers, and not one of them opened their mouth. Not one except Walter Sinclair. He didn't stand, he didn't raise his voice. He closed his paperback slowly, one finger marking his page, and looked at Patricia over the rim of his glasses. "I've been sitting here for the last 5 minutes," he said, his voice low and even. The voice of a man who had spent 4 decades making witnesses sweat on the stand without ever once shouting. "You poured champagne for every single person in this cabin. You smiled at every one of them. You didn't check a single boarding pass, not one. And the only passenger you refused, insulted, and then wiped your hands after touching, happens to be the only black man on this aircraft." Patricia's jaw tightened, her nostrils flared. "Sir, this doesn't concern you," she said. "I'm a retired attorney," Walter said, setting his book down on the armrest. "Everything concerns me." Her left eye twitched. She wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not by a passenger she'd assumed would already be on her side. She turned back toward Elijah. "Last chance," she said. "Either you sit quietly for the rest of this flight, or I call the captain and have you removed for disruptive behavior." Elijah said nothing. He turned his head toward the window and watched the clouds drift beneath the wing, hands folded in his lap, breathing perfectly even. And somehow that silence hit her harder than any argument could have. For the next several minutes, Elijah did absolutely nothing. He didn't press the call button, he didn't demand to speak to the captain. He simply sat there, and that stillness was the one thing Patricia Vance had never learned how to handle. Anger, she knew how to work with. Anger gave her something to push back against, something that let her play the victim, the hard-working flight attendant being harassed by an unreasonable customer. But silence gave her nothing at all. And for a woman who had spent 12 years believing she was the most important person in every cabin she ever worked, being ignored felt unbearable. She retreated behind the galley curtain, arms crossed. Tyler Brooks, 28 years old and 2 years into the job, was restocking the snack drawer. "Did you see that?" she said. "Guy in 2A just sitting there, won't talk, won't move, won't even look at me." Tyler glanced toward the cabin and said nothing useful. "Go tell him he'd be more comfortable back in economy," she instructed. "Use those exact words." Tyler hesitated, looked at the curtain, looked back at her, and went anyway. He stopped beside Elijah's seat, hands clasped in front of him like a man delivering a verdict he didn't believe in. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I just wanted to let you know we have some open seats back in economy if you'd be more comfortable there." Elijah's head turned an inch, just enough to catch him in his peripheral vision. "I'm in my seat," he said. 4 words, no anger in them at all, just fact delivered with the kind of quiet authority most people never manage to build in an entire lifetime. Tyler stood there for 3 more seconds before retreating to the galley. "That's it," Patricia said when he reported back. That's all he said. She gripped the edge of the galley counter hard enough that her knuckles went pale. Somewhere above them, the captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers. Calm and routine, something about cruising altitude and a weather system over Nevada. Nobody in first class was listening. Walter Sinclair was watching. He had closed his paperback 7 minutes earlier and hadn't reopened it since. His eyes moved back and forth between Patricia and Elijah with the slow precision of a man who had spent 4 decades watching people arrive at the worst decision of their lives and not being able to stop themselves. He recognized this pattern. Someone in a position of small power gets challenged. They escalate instead of backing down, because backing down means admitting the story they'd been telling themselves was wrong from the start. Patricia reached for the champagne bottle again, the same one she'd refused to pour for Elijah 20 minutes earlier, and gripped it by the neck. "What are you doing?" Tyler asked. She didn't answer. She adjusted her scarf, picked up a clean glass in her other hand, and walked back toward row 2. The bottle caught the cabin light as she approached, the golden liquid inside swaying gently with each step. Elijah was still watching the window, completely unaware of what was coming. Patricia stopped at row 1 first, topped off the woman there, moved to row 3, refilled the silver-haired man's glass, offered more to the couple in camel coats, who declined. Then she reached row 2. "I was thinking about what you said earlier," she told Elijah, her voice sweet in a way that tasted wrong, like sugar poured over something already spoiled. "Maybe you were right. Maybe I did owe you a drink after all." She tilted the bottle. There was no glass beneath it. She aimed the neck directly over his lap and let the champagne pour, not splash pour, in a slow deliberate stream, straight onto the gray fabric of his hoodie. The cabin heard it before they saw it, a soft wet sound against cloth. Then the stain bloomed outward across the fabric, ran down the crease of his jeans, pooled in the leather seam of the seat between his legs. The scent hit the whole cabin at once, sharp and sweet, $400 of French champagne, soaking into a hoodie that had probably cost $20. Elijah didn't flinch, he didn't shout, he didn't grab for the bottle or push her hand away. He sat perfectly still while the liquid ran down his chest and dripped off his belt onto the carpet. Then, for the first time since she had told him he didn't belong, he turned his head and looked directly at her. His eyes weren't angry, they weren't hurt. They were the eyes of someone watching a person make the final mistake of their career without having the slightest idea it had already happened. "Oops," Patricia said, smiling the real kind of smile, the kind that reaches the eyes because the person behind them genuinely enjoyed what they'd just done. A single drop hung off the rim of the bottle and fell onto his knee. "Sorry about that. Though honestly, that hoodie's probably seen worse." The cabin didn't gasp. A gasp is a reflex. What happened instead was slower, heavier. The woman in 1A pressed a hand over her mouth, not in shock, in shame, the particular shame of watching something wrong unfold and knowing you should have said something 5 minutes earlier. The silver-haired man in 3B set his newspaper down and stared straight ahead, rigid, a man trying very hard to convince himself he wasn't already a witness to something. The couple in camel coats sat frozen in the specific cowardice available to people who can afford to look away. Not everyone looked away. A woman in row 3, someone nobody had noticed the entire flight, reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and started recording. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. Within 30 seconds, 2 more phones were up. Walter Sinclair stood, not quickly, not dramatically, the way a man stands when he's already made a decision and wants the whole room to know it. "I've been watching you since the moment this man sat down," he said, his voice filling the cabin without ever rising. 40 years in courtrooms taught me that volume is for amateurs. Control is for professionals. You refused him service, you insulted him, you humiliated him in front of 6 paying passengers. And now you have deliberately poured champagne on him in full view of this entire cabin. I have tried discrimination cases for 4 decades, and what I just witnessed is one of the most blatant acts of racial bias I have ever seen in my life, and I have seen plenty. "Sir, this doesn't concern you," Patricia said again, though her voice had lost its earlier certainty. "I have 6 witnesses, at least 2 of whom are recording on their phones right now, and a victim who hasn't said a single hostile word this entire flight," Walter said. "This concerns everyone on this plane." Elijah felt the champagne going cold against his skin. He thought briefly about his mother, Ruth Grant, a woman who had cleaned hotel rooms in Detroit for 29 years, coming home every night smelling like bleach and someone else's cologne, who had told him once when he was 10 and came home crying after a classmate called him something ugly. "Baby, the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who already know you're bigger than them. Don't shrink, don't shout, just wait. The truth always finds its way out, it just takes its time." Elijah was waiting. Underneath the armrest, away from every foamer in the cabin, his hand found his own phone. He unlocked it, scrolled to a name and pressed call. Denise Cole answered on the second ring, no greeting, just silence, a habit built over 19 years in corporate aviation where pleasantries wasted time and time wasted money. "Denise," Elijah said, "it's me." Her voice sharpened instantly. In 3 years of working directly for him, he had done this exactly once before, when a gate agent in Miami refused to board a veteran in a wheelchair. That agent was terminated before the plane reached cruising altitude. "I'm on flight 884, he said. "Pull up the crew roster." "Already have it," she said, typing. "Patricia Vance, lead flight attendant, 12 years with the company." She paused. "Tyler Brooks, 2 years. And a third, Kimberly Ross, 3 years. What happened?" she asked. "Vance refused me service, called me a thief and a con artist, wiped down the armrest after touching my boarding pass like I'd contaminated it." Elijah's voice never changed, not by 1 degree. He could have been reading off a grocery list. "Then she poured champagne on me deliberately in front of the entire cabin." Denise stopped typing. 3 seconds of silence from a chief executive on a call like this meant somebody's career was already over. "All 3, she said. "Off the system before you land." 10 minutes, Elijah said. 5, she answered, and the line went dead. He set the phone face down on the armrest, picked up a napkin from his lap, folded it into a neat square, and went back to watching the window. Behind the curtain, Tyler was whispering to Patricia. "He's calling someone," he said. "Let him call," Patricia answered, restocking the drink tray with movements too fast and too sharp, the movements of a woman trying to prove to herself she wasn't rattled. "Who's he calling, a lawyer? Good luck. It's his word against mine, and I have 12 years of a spotless record." "Diane, people were recording. People are always recording," she snapped. "Doesn't mean anything." "What if he's somebody?" Tyler said quietly. Patricia laughed, louder than she meant to. "Look at him, Tyler. Does he look like somebody to you?" Tyler didn't answer, because the honest answer was yes. Something about the stillness of a man sitting in a champagne-soaked hoodie without complaint, without a single crack showing, wasn't the posture of somebody who had lost. It was the posture of somebody who was waiting for the outcome he already knew was coming. 34,000 feet below, the cockpit's communication system received a priority transmission from Sterling Airways headquarters. Captain Robert Hale read the message twice, certain there had been a mistake, and then read it a third time when he realized there hadn't been. He unbuckled his harness and walked into the cabin. Patricia saw him first. She straightened her scarf, folded her hands, and prepared for exactly the outcome she had expected all along, the captain finally arriving to remove the difficult passenger from her cabin. "Captain, thank you for coming out," she began. "The man in 2A has been—" "Please stop talking," Captain Hale said, and the words cut through hers like a blade through silk. He didn't raise his voice. 26 years of command authority sat inside every syllable. He stepped to the center of the cabin, looked at each passenger in turn, and then looked at Elijah, at the champagne stain spreading dark across his hoodie, the folded napkin resting on the armrest. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I apologize for the interruption. I've just received a directive from Sterling Airways headquarters regarding the conduct of this cabin crew. Effective immediately, the following crew members are suspended from duty pending investigation. Patricia Vance, lead flight attendant. Tyler Brooks, flight attendant. Kimberly Ross, flight attendant." Patricia let out a short, disbelieving laugh, the kind people make when their brain rejects something before their mouth can catch up. "Captain, you cannot be serious," she said. 12 years. I've been with this airline 12 years. On whose authority? "On the authority of the chief executive and majority owner of Sterling Airways," Captain Hale said, and turned towards seat 2A. "Mr. Grant, I want to personally apologize on behalf of this crew and this airline." The name landed on the cabin like something physical. Grant, owner, CEO. Patricia heard the words, but for a moment they didn't connect, her mind still running the same program it had been running for the last 40 minutes. The one where she was right, where the man in the hoodie was a fraud, where 12 years of experience made her untouchable. That program crashed in real time in front of 7 passengers, and every one of them watched it happen. Her posture went first, then her chin, then her hands, which unclasped and hung at her sides, as though they'd forgotten what they were for. "Mr. Grant, I had no idea," she said. Elijah didn't look at her. He hadn't looked at her since the champagne hit his chest, and he wasn't going to start now. He turned to the captain instead. "I'd like a glass of champagne," he said, "and I'd like these 3 kept away from every cart, every glass, and every passenger for the rest of this flight." "Yes, sir, immediately," Captain Hale said, and walked to the galley himself. He took the same bottle Patricia had used as a weapon, poured a clean glass with steady hands, and carried it back to seat 2A, delivering it the way it should have been delivered an hour earlier. Elijah took it, raised it slightly, not a toast, just an acknowledgement, and turned back to the window. Behind him, Walter Sinclair stood and began to clap. One pair of hands at first. Then the silver-haired man in 3B joined in, then the woman in 1A, then the couple in camel coats. One by one, the entire first-class cabin of Flight 884 broke into applause. Not the polite kind you give a keynote speaker, the real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere in the chest. Elijah didn't turn around. He sipped his champagne and watched the clouds. Behind the galley curtain, Patricia Vance slid down the wall to the floor and cried. Tyler stood beside her, staring at his shoes, understanding for the first time that 12 years of following someone else's orders hadn't made him innocent. It had made him complicit. Flight 884 touched down at LAX at 9:52 in the evening. Through the cockpit window, Captain Hale could already see them. 2 black SUVs parked near the jet bridge, and 4 people in dark suits standing beside them. 2 from Human Resources, 2 from Legal, dispatched from Sterling Airways headquarters the moment the plane had reported final approach. Patricia walked out first. Not by choice, the captain had instructed her to deplane ahead of the passengers. Her vest was still pressed, her badge still caught the light. She walked the way a person walks toward a sentencing. The HR director was waiting at the end of the jet bridge, tablet in hand, an expression rehearsed for exactly this kind of moment. "Ms. Vance, your employment with Sterling Airways is terminated effective immediately," she said. "Please surrender your identification and security badge." Patricia's fingers trembled as she unclipped the gold badge she had polished every single morning for 12 years, the badge she had once used like a shield against any passenger who dared question her. It made a small sound landing in the director's open palm, the kind of sound that shouldn't mean anything and somehow means everything. Tyler went next. He didn't cry. He handed over his badge with the blank expression of a man who had always suspected this was exactly how following the wrong orders would end. He just hadn't expected it today. Kimberly Ross, the 3rd crew member, the one who had stood behind the curtain the entire time and done nothing, opened her mouth to explain herself. The legal officer raised one hand. She closed it. 3 careers, collected on a jet bridge in under 4 minutes, while passengers filed past with their carry-on bags and their phones and their versions of the story they had just witnessed at 34,000 feet. The silver-haired man from 3B walked past Patricia without a word, but slowed down just enough for her to feel the weight of his silence. The woman from row 3, the one who had started recording first, stopped in front of her, held up her phone, and played 6 minutes and 11 seconds of footage, every word, every drop, every wipe of that armrest. Then she put the phone away and kept walking. For the first time in 12 years, Patricia Vance had nothing left to say. No defense, no excuse, no spotless record to hide behind. Elijah was the last one off the plane, still in his stained hoodie, his boots quiet against the jet bridge floor. The 4 corporate representatives straightened as he approached. The HR director started to speak. He raised one hand. Not tonight, he said. Monday morning, my office, 9 o'clock. He walked past them, through the terminal, out to a plain black car waiting at the curb. The door closed and he was gone. 2 weeks later, Sterling Airways announced a company-wide policy overhaul. Mandatory bias training for all 12,000 employees, a pilot program for body cameras in first-class cabins. An anonymous hotline for passengers to report discrimination, and a zero-tolerance clause printed in bold at the top of every crew handbook stating that any confirmed act of racial discrimination by a Sterling Airways employee would result in immediate termination, no warnings, no second chances. The announcement never mentioned Flight 884 by name. It never mentioned Patricia Vance. It never mentioned Champagne. Everyone who read it knew exactly which flight they were talking about anyway. The footage hit the internet 3 days after the flight, 4 different angles stitched together, 6 million views inside the first 48 hours. Elijah Grant never commented publicly. He never posted anything he didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. Walter Sinclair mailed a handwritten letter to Sterling Airways headquarters, addressed personally to Elijah Grant, 2 pages of blue ink on cream stationery, ending with an invitation to dinner at his home outside Sacramento, a small house on a quiet street with a porch, where he read his paperback thrillers every morning. Elijah accepted. They ate roast chicken, they drank red wine, not champagne, and they talked for 3 hours about the law, about justice, and about the enormous distance that sometimes sits between the two. So here's my question for you tonight. If you'd been sitting in seat 2A, would you have stayed silent, or would you have snapped? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. But here's the part that actually keeps me up at night. Patricia Vance didn't become that person on Flight 884. She'd been doing this for 12 years, deciding who belonged in her cabin, based on nothing more than what she saw when she looked at them, and nobody had ever stopped her before that day. Think about how many people sat in that exact seat before Elijah Grant, people who didn't own the airline, who didn't have a phone call that could end a career in 90 seconds, who just took it, went home, and carried that weight quietly on the inside where nobody else could see it. Elijah got justice because he had power, but justice should never require power to arrive. That's the part we all need to sit with. If dignity only shows up for the people who can already afford to demand it, then what exactly are we calling the rest of it? Which seat were you in on that flight? The one being humiliated? The one watching and staying silent? Or the one who finally stood up? Drop your answer below. I read every single one. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you're new. We tell stories exactly like this every single week. And next time, a janitor walks into a boardroom he was never supposed to enter, and the executive waiting inside has absolutely no idea who's really walking through that door. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.